What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Discovering Bob Dylan podcast. I am Joe. He is Dylan. We've made it past self-portrait. It wasn't that bad. I didn't hate it as much as I thought, as much as everyone warned me. And now today we're back. New morning, I should say. Bob Dylan, he's back. The subtitle of the chapter on New Morning in my big Dylan book, Dylan is back. I mean, that's all, it's all you need to know about this one. He's back writing original songs. He's loose, he's living on his farm. Things are good. He's a happy boy. And all of the trespasses of self-portrait have been washed away for the most part. New Morning, it was critically, kind of right back where Dylan left off with Nashville Skyline. And really, I just feel like he just had to write some original tunes, and it wouldn't even really matter what he wrote. People just wanted the original stuff. And Dylan's not going to phone it in unless he's trying to phone it in purposely. Dylan's gonna. He's such an interesting character. I really have gained an appreciation for Dylan the person because he's just such a dick all the time. And he's like, he never does what anybody wants. And I really appreciate that about him. And that's sort of, that's why I like Steely Dan and Elvis Costello and people like that. They're never going to be the person that people want them to be. And curmudgeon, love the curmudgeon. I'm a curmudgeon. Larry David, Donald Fagen, Bob Dylan. He's right in those ranks. So happy about that. How are you, Dylan? How's things? How's your listening experience? You don't hate self-portrait as much as some people either. So it wasn't like some horrible tragedy that we had to listen to it.
Not at all. No, I wouldn't say that I'm a huge fan of self-portrait as a whole, but there's plenty to like on there. Like I said, I could easily condense it, or honestly, I could condense it, or I could make my own self-portrait double album using material from the album plus the bootleg series, which we failed to mention in the last episode that I had sent you a short 4-song playlist of stuff from that bootleg series, and it sounds like you dug them a decent amount.
Yeah, they were nice. They should have been on on the real album. They should have not done those
Yeah.
weird live versions of like Rolling Stone, and maybe just put on a couple more of those, and maybe it would have been better received.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, even with some of those cover songs, like I know I sent you Pretty Saro, Thirsty Boots, This Evening So Soon, which are some of the ones that claim, and those are all cover versions. Then I also sent you the underdubbed Copper Kettle. Like I mentioned, hearing those songs kind of stripped away, before he's like, all right, now let's throw all the background singers on it and the strings and all this stuff. Like it starts off with him reconnecting to these songs and that he loves, and at the same time he's writing material for what will become New Morning, which we're talking about today. People sometimes talk about it like, oh, well, he put out something so bad in Self Portrait that he had to get back in critical good graces, and that's why he put out New Morning. That's not true. He knew what he was doing with Self Portrait. He was writing and recording a lot of these songs around the same time, and a lot of it actually was put out on this release called Bob Dylan 1970. I don't know if I can get the glare out of here. But a lot of this includes stuff that he was doing at the end of the self-portrait sessions and the beginning of the New Morning sessions, including a lot of stuff with George Harrison. Nothing ends up on New Morning that George Harrison is actually on, but you hear some of them on the bootleg series, you hear all of them on that collection. And a lot of this material, and maybe you can shed a little more light on this, some of it was initially written for a play or a musical. It was that kind of talked about in your big book.
Yeah, he met up with the poet Archibald MacLeish I don't know how to say that. I'm going to assume it's some kind of Irish thing, but
If
not
that's not
necessarily.
how it's pronounced, that is how it's pronounced
That's
now.
right. Who was doing a musical version of The Devil and Daniel Webster titled Scratch. And Bob wrote New Morning, Father of Night, and one more.
Three Angels, maybe?
Yeah, and Three Angels. For that, they didn't end up being used because the play was very dark and like heavy. And I think it was about like apocalypse and sort of like the nuclear bomb. And it was very like not in the mood that Bob Dylan was in. Dylan was, I mean, like I said, he was a happy guy living on the farm, hanging out with Sarah and just like being a dad, wanting to be a dad. The lyrics of Sign on the Window. Build me a cabin in Utah, marry me a wife, catch rainbow trout, have a bunch of kids who call me Pa. That was his mindset. It was not, the dark, the societal changes, the speaker of the voice of a generation stuff. That was in his past. He was happy. He was content. He was one with nature. He didn't want to do all this darkness. So it didn't end up being used for it. But I think the songs have a bit of a religious tone to them that probably was influenced by it, a little bit of gospel in them. They sound a little bit different. They have a little different feel to them. So I don't know if that was because they were written for this play or what, but a little bit of that like John Wesley Harding sort of biblical stuff got drawn in a little bit to that one.
Yeah, like I've mentioned approximately 826 times now that I hear this as the final album in a trilogy with John Wesley Harding and Nashville Skyline, all of them featuring seemingly less grandiose themes than the early to mid 60s work. Pretty laid back Americana soundscapes. The aftermath of the motorcycle crash and the subsequent seclusion to upstate, you hear him throughout this trio of albums searching. He's exploring with a lot more hesitancy and caution than he previously had, or at least in a more relatable fashion. John Wesley Harding, he's focused on these nuanced character studies. Like I said a couple episodes ago on Nashville Skyline, he adapts a character of his own. Self Portrait, I don't really consider part of the trilogy, but it still thematically plays into the concept of searching for something. And in my opinion, he finds what he's looking for on New Morning and he puts it all together. And I have so many thoughts on this album, but I want to hear your take on it before I go much further because I could keep going for a minute about this one and I don't want you to be too
Okay.
influenced by what I have to
Well,
say.
it's interesting because I probably have less to say about this one than most. I think it's a very pleasant album. I think it's a good album. It's certainly better than Self Portrait. I don't know if I enjoy it as much as Nashville Skyline just because it doesn't have that overt country sound. The pedal steel, stuff like that. It's not quite as interesting to me musically, but plenty of good songs on here. If not for you, I prefer George's version on All Things Must Pass, but this one's fine. It's good. Day of the Locust is cool, very band sounding, very, shaggy. They got that ragged style that they were so good at. It has Buzz Fightan, who's a great guitarist, doing a very good Robbie Robertson impression. And it's one of those tracks, kind of old school Dylan, where it sounds like it could go off the rails at any time, but they kind of pull together and get it over the finish line. Time passes slowly, real nice. Piano on this album, very excellent. I think that is the key to me enjoying it as much as I do.
Bob's a cool piano player, isn't he?
He is, and I don't know if he was in the past so much, but he seems like he's improving a lot. And it's definitely more noticeable, I think, on this one. I mean, he had his cool moments, obviously,
Yeah.
on past albums, but here is really the first time I really noticed on, and I believe it is, let's see, Day of the Locust, Time Passes Slowly, Went to See the Gypsy, Winterlude, Sign on the Window, The Man in Me, and Father of Night. He's all playing piano on. And he has a cool style, a little gospel, a lot of big chords, some interesting movements that he's doing that isn't quite what you're used to, I would say, in rock in general. So very cool. And I can't help wonder if I would have been into Dylan more earlier if he was a piano player instead of a guitarist and harmonicist and a front man. Because the way that the piano just counterpoints his voice is just so like excellent to me. Like that is kind of why I love someone like Elvis Costello because it has such good keys on all his songs. And even though his voice isn't like my favorite thing in the world, and it's similar to Dylan's in a lot of ways, like you get that like beautiful element from the piano that is sometimes missing in just like the dry blues kind of stuff. So hearing Dylan play all these really cool piano parts, really, my favorite part of this album easily. It's kind of the same players. Al Cooper done a bunch of organ stuff, more keys, Russ Kunkel on drums, Charlie Daniels on bass, bunch of session players on guitar, including Buzzy, who's excellent. I mean, there's really no bad songs except for the two very bad songs that I skip. And that would be If Dogs Run Free, which is annoying proto like Tom Waits beat poetry. Really dislike that one. And Winterlude is kind of a throwaway as well. So other than those two, I think everything on this album is quite good. Sign on the Window, real, that intimate, personal type of song that he's been doing so well. The Domestic Bliss, that was the one with I have a bunch of kids who call me Pa. That song, it's very lovely. Feeling there from Bob. One More Weekend, kind of standard blues. Not too much to say about that one. The Man in Me, that was the big song from this album. I guess I don't know if it was a single, but it sort of has become his most well-known. I Abide, that one. Really like the organ, just fantastic stuff from Cooper. Dylan's vocals, he's not crooning anymore so much. They're a little rougher, a little scratchier, a little more old school Dylan. And I think that works well on this album. And you got some gospel stuff on Three Angels and Father of Night, which has like a faster tempo, some cool piano, got those backing female vocals, which is cool. Wish it was a little longer, actually. So, I mean, all in all, it's a four-star album. It's 1970. I don't know if this really is up there with my top albums from 1970. Not quite after the Gold Rush. It's not quite Layla, not quite, CSNY. But I think it's a good album. It might make my top 25 on the year. Nothing wrong with it. I don't know this for sure. Albums from Happy Contented Men are almost always like lower on the totem pole for me. Like I like the angry, heartbroken stuff. Usually when people are, older, they get happy, they get fat, they content. And the quality of the songwriting usually drops. I don't think it drops too much here, but I miss a little bit of that fire from Bob. Not to take away from his happiness and his well-being here, but I have a feeling in the future maybe we get some of that fire back, some of that darkness in 5 years or so. Totally, totally fine with this album. It's a nice, third part of the trilogy. I think I agree with you. Just the aura of it, his mood and his songwriting style definitely seems to be similar from John Wesley Harding to Nashville Skyline to this, even if the type of music is very different. It's very much the same like Bob Dylan character who's writing all of it, which is fine, which is good. He can write he can write happy, he can write content. I do prefer something like Layla, where it's just like, God, kill me now. I'm just gonna take out all my anger and aggression and sadness on this electric guitar. Cool album, love the piano, 4 stars. Probably fit in between the big dogs like Skyline and Bring It All Back Home and ahead of the freewheeling Bob Dylan probably. So right in that area, we're talking mid ranking if we're going through all 11. of these albums?
All right, so we've got some stuff that we agree on, some stuff that we disagree on. If you want a longer Father of Night, Manfred Mann covered it, and I think made it like an 8-minute song. So you can go check that out. The If Dogs Run Free slander needs to stop. It's become an epidemic. People talking about it like it's one of his worst songs ever. I cannot disagree more with that. I think most songwriters would kill to write a verse as good as "If dogs run free, then what must be, and that is all. True love can make a blade of grass stand up straight and tall. In harmony with the cosmic sea, true love needs no company. It can cure the soul, it can make it whole if dogs run free." I'm just saying.
That's a nice line, but the way it's delivered with
I also don't
the
mind
scat
this.
and the bopping and
See,
stuff. That's
see, I don't mind the scatting, so maybe I'm a different breed. I also saw him again randomly the very first time I saw him in the year 2000. He played "If Dogs Run Free." No one in his band was scatting, so maybe he would have liked it more. Who knows? Okay, I think a relatively fair review. I, it's tough to say how fair my review is, because this album really means a lot to me. I truly love this record. It resonated very deeply with me from the first moment that I heard it, and it continues to. I think it is so gorgeously honest and intimate. Like you said, you've got two of his finest optimistic love songs. I agree. I George Harrison may have recorded the definitive version of "If Not For You." It's one of maybe 6 Dylan covers that I like better than the original. But I think Bob's Reading is still fantastic, and compositionally, I think it's one of his most delightfully earnest songs ever. And now I want to return to what you said in the past of I don't know if I believe this guy as a singer of love songs. Are we softening up a little bit on that stance now?
yeah, I guess. I mean, I'll have to think about that.
Sure, sure. We can keep revisiting that. I mean, I love that the same guy that wrote Gates of Eden is the same guy that wrote "If Not For You, My Sky Would Fall, Rain Would Gather Too. Without Your Love, I'd Be Nowhere at All." It's so simple, but it's still so poetic. The Man in Me, the other side of that coin, such a celebratory soundscape, such passionate vocals. I mentioned in the last episode that we are entering possibly my favorite era of his vocals. And I love his voice on this record. He's got such an awesome, smoky rasp, possibly due in part. Apparently, he had a cold during these sessions, and you can occasionally hear that. But for the next like 5, 6 years, I think his voice is just miraculous. And speaking of strong vocal performances, Day of the Locust, I think, is such an underappreciated Dylan story. I agree. Another great, joyous, kind of gospely backdrop with excellent piano work and great piano work, like you said, across the whole album. Day of the Locust also is one of my favorite set of lyrics on the record. That song, along with Time Passes Slowly and Went to See the Gypsy, really exemplify what I appreciate about his writing on this record, because there isn't much lyrically reminiscent of the mid 60s surrealism. There's no sword swallowers, there's no leopard skin pillbox hats, there's no utopian hermit monks, But even though that brand of lyricism kind of is what initially draws a lot of people to Dylan, I think his approach to New Morning is perfectly understated, but it still has so much wit and eloquence and the great storytelling that he's known for. You hear that in those 3 songs. And like you said, he sounds so happy on this record. And I think for him to be writing and singing these songs after everything he went through in the mid 60s is honestly really inspiring to me. Like, I think the title track is so fantastic. I mean, again, he sounds so elated on that song, and the way the background vocals lift him up, a fantastic melody on that song, really cool chord progression. it's fantastic, and I think that Sign on the Window is even more fantastic. And I think that those songs kind of reflect these moments of true peace and serenity, which can be hard to come by for most anyone. So, and like knowing what this guy went through and the fact that, like, hey, even if just for this moment in time, he did it, like he was able to get through that and here he is. But, he's also not without doubt. The lyric that you mentioned from Sign on the Window, which is my favorite song on the record. Sign on the Window is a very special song for me. That is very, very close to a top 10 Dylan song all time for me. You mentioned my favorite lyric, but you left out what I think is the most important part. Build me a cabin in Utah, marry me a wife, catch rainbow trout, have a bunch of kids who call me Pa. That must be what it's all about. And then he repeats, that must be what it's all about. It's domestic bliss. It's this scene that is unattainable to him just a few years prior. But to me, that repeated line suggests the question, like, that must be what it's all about, right? Like, because I've done this, I put in this work, I'm happy, so we're good, right? Like, and maybe that's clouded by the fact that I know, over the next 5 years, it turns out to not be totally right. But I don't know. I think he handles these themes so well. And I just love all the songs on an individual level. I think One More Weekend is really slinky and cool. Yeah, I guess to some degree a basic blues structure, but it's aided by that vocal. And I think those background singers are great. I never put together that I don't know who plays guitar in what song. Who did you mention was playing lead on Day of the Locusts?
Buzzy fighting,
So
whatever.
I I imagine that he's probably playing on One More Weekend too, because I can hear kind of that Robbie Robertson inspired playing. Yeah, Father of Night is really unique. Like you said, that super fast piano with the background vocals. And so now this is the first time. So Self Portrait was the first album with consistent backing vocals across it. Before that, other than Johnny Cash singing on one song on Nashville Skyline, Self Portrait was the first. This is the first album of original material. And, singing with Bob is hard. Many people have sung with Bob, and some have succeeded, and some have not. Because he never sings the same phrase the same way. But I think their names are Hilda Harris and Alberton Robinson. I think they do a cool job adding some textures to this record. In many ways, this is a really comforting record for me. I don't expect anyone to love it as much as I do, but I do love this album. Maybe it's lacking in the lasting influence or historical importance that other albums have, but for me, it makes up for it with such exceptional beauty. I can't say that I really take issue with too much of what you said. I think what you said was extremely fair and it was very positive. I think you have a very measured reaction to it. But this is a really, really special one for me. And I think as the first record of the 70s of all original material, it sets it off on a fantastic foot.
It's a fine album. I obviously don't have any real connection to it because I just heard it last week, and so maybe in time the domestic bliss of this will seep into my life. It is interesting to see Dylan now. I guess he's been this way, but you could say on Nashville Skyline, country rock really wasn't a thing yet. I mean, it had barely been invented, maybe the year before. John Wesley Harding was really one of the first, rootsy albums. This one doesn't feel like it's on the zeitgeist or the cutting edge anymore. It doesn't feel like he's pushing or anything like that. He's very content, even musically, just to kind of be in 1970, I think. And I don't know if you feel you probably don't feel that it's a negative on the album or negative for Bob. Do you think that matters at all to his songwriting and his legacy, that he's sort of just one of many now? Like his time of being the, the creator of genres and the master of, the scene is kind of over now, and he's very happy and content living on a farm. And that doesn't seem to affect your love of this album, or what Bob does in the 70s at all or anything like that.
Well, no, I do my best to divorce my opinions as much as I can from things like that. At the end of the day, what matters most is, does this resonate with me? Do I like the sound of this? Certain albums, it's hard, like how do you listen to Double Fantasy not knowing, like, oh yeah, John died 3 weeks after this was released, certain things like that. But I can't say that matters too much to me. But I'm not gonna say, when you think of the music that defines 1970. No, I'm not going to make an argument. New Morning is one of the 10 most important records that came out that year, or anything like that. But I mean, he wrote a song on it that was immediately covered later that year on one of the most important records to come out that year, All Things Must Pass, if not the most important record to come out that year. People are still, I think, listening to Bob. People are still, going back to that. Well, like I said, Manfred Mann is looking at this and covering some stuff from it. I think that he's achieving a little bit more of that underground notoriety that he's kind of searching for and hoping for. But yeah, I don't know. To me, it doesn't matter too much. I mean, what matters to me is how it sounds. And I think it sounds awesome. I think the production on this album is so, like, perfectly unfussy, stripped down.
We actually didn't talk about that either. It is sort of an interesting story. I believe this one was all in New York, recorded in New
Mhm.
York. Bob Johnson started to produce it and then just like stopped showing up. So Al Cooper took over, which he is uncredited for, and he didn't on the original release. He didn't even get a special thank you, which is what he had agreed to. Some contractual obligations prevented them from putting his name as producer, but Dylan apparently, or the record company, forgot to put it on there, and that sort of caused a rift between them, Cooper and Bob Dylan. But yeah, I mean, the production wise, I think it sounds great for the most part. You always have those like couple weird moments where it's like, did they like cut in something there, or did somebody go out of tune, or there's always something, but it certainly doesn't take away from anything here.
You can hear on the Another Self-Portrait bootleg, it's not just it covers stuff from 69 through 71. So it ostensibly covers the beginning of the self-portrait sessions through, and all through self-portrait, all through New Morning, and then even going up to, he records some stuff in 1971. A single is released. The A side is Watching the River Flow. The B side is When I Paint My Masterpiece. And then he records, I think, 4 songs that end up being extra tracks on his Greatest Hits Volume 2. And there's some other outtakes from those on Another Self-Portrait. So you get all that, and you hear there's 2 very highly produced versions of New Morning and Sign on the Window. It's the master tracks. It's the songs that you know from the record, but like full horn sections, like some orchestration, like almost some self-portraity stuff going on. And on the album, some of it is left in New Morning after the bridge. Always they so quickly, they always do when you're with me. You hear a little French horn for like 2 measures. And you don't even, to me, it doesn't like stick out like a sore thumb. Like, I remember there was a point where I just noticed it one day. I'm like, oh yeah, there's a fucking French horn right there that has not been on any other point in this record. And same thing, Sign on the Window. After the bridge, there's a quick little like string thing or it's a clarinet thing. I don't know exactly what it is, but those are left over from these bigger arrangements that were ultimately taken out. And I think for good reason. I do think that after Self Portrait, it's nice to hear things scaled back a little bit. And yeah, off the top of my head, like, no, this record does not mean as much to 1970s music or culture as All Things Must Pass, Bridge Over Troubled Water, you can name God knows how many albums. But to me, it doesn't take away from its greatness. I still think it's a fantastic statement. And as you see later in the decade, he hasn't fully lost his commercial appeal. And honestly, and this is a nice segue to talk about what we're going to do next. Bob takes a little bit of a break. So we're 1970 now. The next albums we're going to talk about come out in 1973. But in our next episode, we're gonna kind of take the journey with Bob. We're gonna go through 1971, and he shows up at the concert for Bangladesh, and he has some of these assorted songs, and then he's kind of he's singing all these songs about these domestic bliss, and yeah, he's kind of just out of the picture for a couple of years, but then he ends up being in Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid movie, which he does the soundtrack for. And then later in 1973, an album is released without his permission called Dylan that is still considered a part of his canon. It was eventually, for years, it was not officially re-released on CD, but it was finally given a re-release in this complete box set. So we're going to talk about all that in the next episode. We won't go super, super in-depth into everything, but we'll go through all of it. But one of the reasons, there's two main reasons I want to talk about the concert for Bangladesh. First is because it's awesome. The whole concert's awesome, but Dylan's performance is very notable and awesome. But yeah, maybe he's not, he's not changing the tides like he did in the mid 60s at this moment in time. He doesn't have the influence of so many people at this moment. Drawing a blank, but it's 1970. There's people, Zeppelin is changing music, Black Sabbath is changing music, the prog bands are changing music, and then you've got these other Simon and Garfunkel releases their last album, their biggest album. He does a solo career. You got, Cat Stevens doing stuff. There's so much. But in 1971, when George puts this on, the white whale for him of the concert for Bangladesh is, I need to get Bob to show up. And when Bob showed up, it was one of those things like, oh my, he's back. Because that's the thing, like, after the motorcycle crash, he does, 3 songs at a Woody Guthrie tribute in 1968. And then he does the Isle of Wight in 69. And that's it. And then he does these few songs in 71 at the concert for Bangladesh. And then New Year's Eve with the band, I believe 71 going into 72. But like he is off the radar, and that in and of itself for people is still, sort of, he's shrouded in mystery around this time, and it gets a little hidden by the people who are kind of holding his, musical spot in culture. The cachet that he had in the mid 60s is now held by other people, but people are still like, he's there in the back of their heads at the very least. And when he shows up, it's like, holy shit, Bob is here. Kind of like now when Justin Bieber finally does something, after he's been quiet for so long.
He missed his chance at the Super Bowl. Could have joined Ursher out there.
Ursher, huh?
Ursher. It is interesting because I had no idea what Bob was doing between 1970 after this album and 1972, 73. So
yeah.
Well, I guess we'll find out on the next episode here on Discovering Bob Dylan. If you like this video, give us a like, subscribe to the channel, leave your comments on New Morning in the comments section, and follow us social media, all that good stuff. And check back next time when we do Bob Dylan 1971 to 1973 here on Taste Like Music.